Again, good morning, Sangha. Thanks so much and welcome. We're so grateful to have Kosestsu, Randy Earl, in Ango this month. As a part of when we have a priest in Ango, what that really means is they actually are here for a whole month. They're leading services. They're here for meetings. They do service work, kind of anything and everything in Ango. But the main thing is that they're here to practice, have an in-depth practice, and work with Hojo Sensei on their path along as part of their practice path. So again, thank you, Kosetsu. We're so excited to have you here. But this morning he's going to be talking about his wayfinding talk, and what that is how he actually got here, what that looked like along his path, and tell us a little bit about that and much more. So I'm going to hand it over to Hojo Sensei so he can give us any additional information for Kosetsu, since he's working very closely with him this month.
Kosestsu has been a long-time webmaster. He initiated our web pages many years ago. I can't remember how many years.
Over a decade.
Over a decade at least. And he, along with Fusat's April, are kind of the core of our online media group. And so if any of you have anything to offer there, any questions about that, they're the ones to contact. Out of my depth, for sure. I'm pre-digital. So Kosetsu also sponsored a lot of that, so we owe him a great debt of gratitude for putting that all together for us. And he will be here for the full month, so he can invite you to have lunch with him, or tea, or breakfast, or whatever, if you might want to have a personal one-on-one practice discussion with him. He's a black robe, which means a novice priest in the formal path. The formal path is open to everybody affiliated with us. We don't sort of recommend it or promote it. Across the country now, I would say female versus male priests are about 50-50. And it's open to everyone. But we think Zen is for everyone, but not everyone is for the formal path. I wouldn't recommend to anyone to go through what I've gone through in doing this. So with that brief introduction, I want to turn over to Kosetsu and let him tell you a little bit more about himself and the wayfinding talk. You'll learn more than you want to know or need to know.
Yes.
And I will act as first questioner. Things occur to me after the talk and the Q&A period. I will certainly bring those up, and Fusatsu will facilitate the question and answer and call upon you to unmute and bring up any comment or question you may have for Kosetsu. Welcome.
First of all, can you hear me perfectly well, or should I take the mask off for the? Oh, okay. So yes, first of all, Hojo welcomed me, and that's the first thing I wanted to say is I've been here a little bit early. I've been here for a week, kind of half here, not here. I was still working. But everybody that I've met has given me a very warm, supportive welcome, so that's been wonderful. Thank you all very much for that. I clearly feel it very, very well. And I've already met several folks virtually and some live, and I would like to continue to do that. There are various ways to get in touch with me. You can contact anybody here in the Zendo or the Sangha, and they know how to get in touch with me. Later this afternoon, I hope to put up a web page on the ASZC site, about my Ango period with more information about how to get in touch with me and what we can do. When it's traditional, as I understand it, to have this kind of wayfinding talk. And I think that's a lovely way to see how people came to Zen, what their path is, also to demonstrate that everybody's path is different. So what I talk about today will be my path. It certainly doesn't need to be somebody else's. If you say, gee, I don't fit that mold, maybe I shouldn't be here. That's not the case at all. Your path would be very, very different. As Hojo, or pretty much anybody who knows me knows, I really love to dive into something. My title at work as opposed to being, or in addition to being a team manager, is senior business analyst. It's in the name. I like to analyze things. I like to dive into them, which may sound a bit counterintuitive in the Zen world, where we don't want to overthink things, but hopefully we'll get into that in a little bit. So I'll start off the way we're all taught in middle school, right? It's like, well, define your term. But that's the way I do things. It's like, well, what does wayfinding mean? In Zen, we talk about words being a finger pointing to the moon. So I want to think about, well, what is this moon that this finger is pointing to? And again, these are all the way I see it. The most traditional way to define wayfinding, I think, or a path, is a way to get from point A to point B, right? A sequence of steps to get to a destination, very linear. Another sense would be in terms of orientation or direction, not necessarily the path, but at least which direction am I going into, or what is my kind of purpose, what I'm trying to accomplish, kind of thing. I feel this is very much what we're doing when we take our vows, for example, setting an intention and a direction. So even though the details of the path aren't clear, the overall direction is. So this sense resonates with me pretty strongly. And the third sense would be, if we look at the word way, I think of it as a state of being. What is my way to be? This is the definition of it that probably rings most truly with me now, although all of them do in some sense, and probably have to different degrees, different stages in my life. But those are the three ways I'm going to talk about my wayfinding path a little bit, those three different senses. So, and kind of starting with the last one I mentioned in terms of a way of being, when I look at this, and this is something that's kind of, I've realized more over recent years when I look back over my life, there's a couple of key characteristics that really come to mind. One of those being comfortable with ambiguity. As a matter of fact, I talk about that as being a trait that I look for in job candidates. I need, for what we do on my team, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later, is I need people who are comfortable with ambiguity. If they need fixed answers, then they're not going to work well. The other one is asking questions. Professionally, I ask questions. Personally, I ask questions. And this will be kind of my jumping off point to the kind of traditional, path of the wayfinding talk. So I have a history of asking questions, and I'm going to give a few examples to make that point. And sometimes asking questions has led to difficulties, but more often it's led to opportunities. So, not to bore you too much with, I started off as a child, but when I was a kid, when I was 14, I was raised in the Methodist Church in the South. So, most of us are kind of familiar with that, or many of us. And when I was 14, it was time to go through confirmation, and it was like, oh, great, this is, I've heard all the kid stories, all the simplistic explanations. Now I'm going to get the straight dope. I'm going to, they're going to tell me how this works. And it didn't work for me. I felt like they were just extensions of the same kind of kid stories in my mind. And when I asked why, that, I could only go a couple of layers into the why. It was a very shallow pool of questioning available, and it very quickly got to, because God said so, and that's it. So that didn't work for me. So that was one of those first cases where questioning caused problems. It didn't necessarily lead to opportunities at that point. But let's move on. In college, I have an example that I love, and I'm forever grateful to this person. So I enjoyed science and technology. And came time to go to university. I went to North Carolina State University in Raleigh, which is, again, where I now live, come full circle, 30 years later, 40 years later. And I started off in electrical engineering, and my first semester was taking classes. And at a point, my advisor came to me and very, I think it was very insightful of him. He said, you're disrupting class. You keep asking why questions. Engineers are all about how to do things. They'd say, okay, to solve this kind of problem, you'd use a Fourier series transform. Well, why? Because it works. Let's move on. So he suggested that if I was interested in why questions, that I go into physics, which I did, and I'm very grateful. That was a wonderful transition for me. And again, I apologize if I'm speaking to people who don't understand anything about science, and this is not meant to go too deeply into that. But so, for example, if you're in engineering curricula, you get kind of a toolkit like, okay, here's the ideal gas law for understanding how gases behave. In physics, we started off with more fundamental principles and derived what the ideal gas law should be. And at the end of the course, the final exam, I don't think I'll ever forget. I don't remember all the details, but it's like, okay, until now you've lived in a universe where the spin of particles was plus or minus 1/2. Now it's plus or minus 1/3. What does the ideal gas law look like in this universe? And I was so proud of myself that I actually was able to work through that and figure it out. So I think that's kind of a good example of what I was looking for and where I fit. I didn't need to know, okay, this is the tool, you use this tool for this job. I want to know why it works for that job. So in my career, I followed kind of a typical career path in IT. Well, I won't go into my resume because that's boring. Nobody wants to go through that. You can find that in LinkedIn. I went through various stages, but I kind of rose through the ranks. I was good at technology. I was good as an individual contributor. So if you're good as an individual contributor, you get to try being a manager of people and a manager of projects and things like that. And I rose, and I was doing project management, and I was managing a department. And I think, what's the name of the Peter principle? You rise to the level of your incompetence. So I rose. I became, this was in a Germanic culture, so it was a long title, Director, Division Information Officer, Europe. And I was managing projects and teams, and I was not enjoying life. It's not that there's anything wrong with that. Some people can really enjoy that, and there's a lot of value to that. But it wasn't good for me. And I took a career break. And there's long stories behind all those kinds of things, which again, it's not directly related to the Zen path. And then when it came back to go into the working world, I said, I want to do something that seems like fun. And what felt like fun to me was kind of that business analyst role, working with clients, asking them lots and lots of questions to find out what they need, and to work with our teams in terms of figuring out how do we deliver a solution to their needs. And I realize I skipped a step here. So I'm trying not to like read, a pre-prepared. I've got notes. I want to go back to one because I think it's very important. I was working for in the aerospace industry, GE Aerospace. We had 14 different divisions, making aircraft and parts for submarines and lots of whiz-bang technology things. And I ended up in corporate. And in the 90s, this was in the 90s, the ISO 9000 quality initiative was a very big trend in business. And it was really looking at your internal processes. And since I was at corporate, we would go to each division and it's kind of a standard joke. We'd walk in the door and say, "Hello, I'm from corporate and I'm here to help," and their eyes would roll. It's like, "Oh, great," And invariably, they would listen politely and then say in a slightly condescending manner, it's like, "Yeah, that's great, but you don't understand. We're special. We're different because fill in the blank. We make things that fly. We make things that go into space. We make things that explode, so we're special and we're different." And that was rather intimidating. It's like, why? What right do I have to be in here telling them how to run their business? I don't know anything about their business. And to kind of cut to the chase, the point was I had beginner's mind, so to speak. I didn't know anything about their business. I did not need to know anything about their business. What I needed to know, and what I quickly figured out, was I needed to know how to ask questions, how to, in kind of a structured way, to get the necessary information and to rearrange that and repeat it back and organize it in ways to help them achieve a greater realization of where they had opportunities to improve, things like that. And I became very comfortable with that, walking into a business or a client where I know nothing about them, yet confident that I could help them just by skillfully asking questions. And so I guess what I wanted to demonstrate here is that this has been a recurring theme throughout my life. And I had to go through several of those stages before I started to realize that, oh, well, this is something that I like to do and I do well, and it seems to be important to me. Another thing that kind of goes hand in hand with that, I think, with asking questions, is being comfortable with ambiguity. You don't ask questions if you think you know the answers already, right? And something that I think you learn if you ask questions a lot is that you don't know all the answers. And in fact, you cannot know the answers. The more you learn, the more you learn that you don't know that is out there, all right? I think Dogen talks about this in Genjo Koan when he talks about, having great realization about delusion, right? When I look at the different types of questions that you ask, like in science and in physics, everybody pretty much knows that we're all about asking questions, but what we tend to ask are very, very, very specific questions. You control all the other variables. It's a very narrow, tight question to which you get a very specific answer. And that's great. You get all the pieces, right? And you can build the bigger picture, but each question at a time tends to be, that you can verify experimentally, is a very small question. So the more tightly defined the question, the more precise the answer you can get. Whereas if you flip that, the broader the question you ask, the less specific the answer can be, right? So if you're asking broad questions like we are, what is the essential nature, all right? What is this? That's kind of the famous Zen question, what is this? Every moment, what is this? That's a super broad question. So the answer is going to be equally broad. So to me, to be able to ask those kinds of questions, you have to be comfortable with ambiguity. So this then brings me to we're talking about kind of my characteristics, right? So this brings me to the Zen approach. Why did Zen resonate with me? So when we look at the essentials of Zen practice, great faith, great doubt, great perseverance. Well, I have, faith in the process that this works for me. Doubt is, the questioning, right? The endless questioning. And then the perseverance to keep doing that over and over again. So I guess that's why Zen really resonated with me. So that, in my mind, this kind of transitions to kind of the classic wayfinding in terms of how did I find Zen. So I mentioned that I was raised Methodist, and as often happens as a teenager, I let a couple of young ladies convince me to go to church with them, right? And that didn't work out. But it was kind of my first steps toward experimentation and seeing something else. And I already talked about my confirmation process, so I realized, well, this wasn't what I was looking for. So my mother, bless her, she was extremely supportive in taking me to the public library very, very frequently. I mean, she did lots of great things for me, but that's one that I particularly loved. And so not only was I getting books all the time and reading, some of which were kind of the Zen classics like Zen Flesh, Zen Bones, but you'd see the notices of public lectures and things like that. And this was the mid 70s, and one of the public lectures that I noticed one time was on transcendental meditation, TM. So I went to the lecture, and they invited you to a newcomers class. So I went to the newcomers class and things like that, and I learned TM. And so that was my meditation practice for some years, rather infrequent and haphazard, but also I kind of stuck with it, which is also a trend with me. Like I don't run tons of miles every week, but I've been a runner for 45 years, so I do that a lot of times. So I had that awareness of meditative practices and Buddhism. Left school, went to work, landed in Western Massachusetts, and there was a Tibetan Lama there, and I kind of described that. For me, maybe not so much for others, but that was diving into the deep end of the Buddhist pool. Lots of terminology that I was not familiar with, lots very high church kind of things. So there was kind of an attraction to the teachings, but it didn't quite fit. But in that one of the jobs I had there, I started doing a lot of business travel. So, for example, a lot of my travels took me to Los Angeles, and that was my first proper Zen Center experience when I went to the Zen Center of Los Angeles. And I went to kind of an intro session, and then I went for a Zazenkai, a day-long sit, and I enjoyed that and went back for other Zazenkai as I had business travels there, and went to other Zen centers. I continued doing this over the years. I lived in New England for a while, and I found the Mountains and Rivers Order under Daido Luri Roshi, and went to some retreats there, and that was a wonderful experience. I consider him. I'm very broad in my definition of teachers. It may be somebody that I've never met, and but I've really gained a lot from their books. I only had one Dokusan with Luri Roshi, but attended retreats there with his students. One that has visited Atlanta was Bonnie Myotai Trace, and so I learned a lot there and really enjoyed that. And then I took a job move to Switzerland, and I was in Basel, and I found a local sitting group in Switzerland. And I wasn't fluent in Swiss German, but you don't have to be very fluent in the local language to sit Zazen with people. So I did that. And then after 5 years there, I came back to the US, and we landed in Atlanta, and this was in 2002. And that's when I found the Atlanta Soto Zen Center, and my years and years of practice just kind of haphazard on my own, I finally became a recurring member of a Zen center. Thank you for attending. It's nice to see you here. Oh, I understand completely, no problem. So I started attending regularly, participated in the book group, had Dokusan with Hojo a few times, things like that, and undertook Jukai, and kind of formally declared my status as a Buddhist. And after about 18 months, my job took me, or my career path took me back to Switzerland again for another 5 years. So back to, this time in the Zurich area, find another Zen group there. And again, it was easy to sit with people, but studying the Dharma is challenging enough without taking what I call a sharp left turn through Swiss German, because I wasn't fluent. It was rather challenging. But Hojo, back to, I was talking about bless my mother and bless him, he reached out to me and said, we have telephones and we have email. You don't have to disappear. And so we kept in touch and had practice discussions in Dokusan, and I started working on the website, and we would talk about that and so on. So, and when I flew back to the US, I would try to time, because a lot of times you fly through Atlanta to get anywhere, right? So I could swing a trip by the Zen Center for a day visit, or for several times I was able to have retreats, things like that. And never moved back to Atlanta again after 5 years in Switzerland. About 11 years ago now, we moved back to North Carolina. So have been for most of my life, and I still am a remote member. But as technology makes it increasingly easier to be a part of everything, that's becoming less and less of a problem. I've always felt very welcome. I think one of the recent, when I say recent, I mean, 2 or 3 years ago, I came for a visit and I said, oh, it just feels like home. Hojo said something about seeing me again. I said, yeah, it just feels like home walking in here. So that's kind of my, the traditional path of A to B to C to D to E. That's how I got here today. But I'd like to go back to the questions aspect a little bit, if I may, in that, in Zen, I found a path that values questioning more than answers, right? And I knew that was the place for me. So that questioning is frustrating for others sometimes, because a lot of people get frustrated when they ask me something, and my answer is, well, that depends. And then I start asking more questions. And that frustrates some people. But when I look at the Zen tradition, I look at Dogen's big question. Well, if we are already Buddhas, why do we have to practice, right? If I look at what I consider the Silent Thunder Order's big question, how do we realize our Bodhisattva vow as householders in the modern world, right? If I look at my big question, what does my practice look like now? I know what it looked like yesterday. I know what it looked like 10 days ago or 10 years ago. What does it look like now? And what might it look like going forward? And in this particular role here, where I'm here during Ango, it's like, what could my role going forward be? What can I offer to the community, right? How can I help others? So I find it interesting when I look at those three questions, right? Dogen's question, the STO question, my question. They all have a bias towards action. It's not some philosophical, how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, or okay, there's this piece of information I want. I found that piece of information. I'm done. It's more back towards that wayfinding in terms of orientation, what direction, what purpose, what vow. Those are the kinds of questions that I find myself dealing with more now. And I'm going to come to the part where I'm going to reiterate the caveat that this is my path. It doesn't have to be your path or anybody else's path. If you don't value questions or ambiguity to the extent that I do, that doesn't mean that Zen's not necessarily a fit for you. But I ran across something that was very interesting, and this is just in the last month. I was looking at a different way to evaluate, and I'm putting that in scare quotes because that was one of my difficulties, was I didn't like the evaluation, employee evaluation sounded so judgmental, right? I wanted to look at it, it's more of a career discussion, and I was looking for other methods other than where are you weak, and let's improve a weakness. It's let's flip that. How do we help you grow? And I found, again, analyst, researcher, right? I found the Gallup organization has been doing, well, I've always known the Gallup organization, but I found a tool where based on all their research, they've produced some tools to help people identify their strengths, to know what to leverage of people. And I said, well, before I do this with employees, I've got to do this with myself. And I took the Clifton Strengths Assessment. It says these are the things that you need, that you do really well, and if you leverage these, you're going to be successful. And what I thought was curious was after my career pause, and I said, let me do something that's fun. I found something that lined up really well with these things, and I think the Zen path lines up with them really well as well. So I'm just going to talk about my top 5. They talk about themes, and there's a whole bunch of them, and these are just the top 5, kind of in order. So the learner theme, that's my top theme. Learners want to continuously improve, in particular, the process of learning rather than the outcome excites them. This relates to the questioning. As a relator, they enjoy close relationships with others. They find deep satisfaction in working hard with friends to achieve a goal. Well, that reminds me of working with the Sangha, being here for Ango, right? The third one is connectedness. These folks have faith in the links between all things. Does this sound like, our definition of emptiness to anyone? Strategic, creating alternative ways to proceed. Okay, does that sound like what we're trying to do in the STO, right? And input, have a craving to know more. Well, again, that comes back to the questioning. So, again, this is
what the STO is.
Oh, yes, the Silent Thunder Order. 11 years ago now, I think, we founded the Silent Thunder Order to provide a training structure and umbrella organization to support those who wanted to continue in the formal path, to help, for those of us who see our Bodhisattva vow as following the formal path as a way to help others, and again, that's not the only way, we formed the Silent Thunder Order. So
it's also a service organization to the affiliate practice leaders of the ASZC, who may or may not be on the formal path. We do support some affiliates who,
right,
not necessarily preach.
Absolutely, yeah. So I promise I'm wrapping up shortly here. I feel like I'm rambling, but then I value rambling, and I'm going to talk about that in just a moment here. So, we've talked about these 3 senses of wayfinding, how they relate again to me, my particular path. So we talked about the first sense in terms of locations and times and groups and experiences. The second sense in terms of the general direction, orientation, which in my case is questioning. And the third sense in terms of finding a way of being. And anybody who knows me knows that I love to tell little personal stories about my family and things like that. And my wonderful supporting wife, she is such a great mirror for me in so many ways. And anybody who looks in the mirror knows that you can't lie to yourself looking in a mirror, and she won't let me lie to myself. She reflects very clearly. And sometimes she shows me some really beautiful things. So when we lived in Europe, she helped push me out of my comfort zone, and become more comfortable with ambiguity. It sounds like I've always been that way, but no, I had to practice, getting that way, and my wife helped me do that. And she had this wonderful habit as we were traveling around in Europe. She'd find a place and she'd say, this looks like a good place to get lost. And we would leave the tourist path. We would avoid the tourist restaurants. We'd go wandering through residential neighborhoods. We'd go off marked roads and things like that. And amongst our friends, who we oftentimes were traveling with friends, we got known for, we would miss appointments. Like, okay, we're going to meet for lunch, and we didn't show up, because we got lost. Or, well, we developed a a habit for missing the last train out of wherever we were. More than once, we spent the night on public benches, things like that. Or one time it was the last boat off of an island that we missed. But we had some wonderful, beautiful experiences doing that. We were in one tourist place one time, I think it was Rickrevere, and we were talking to a local artist in his shop. I was telling you the other day about collecting some art, and he said, "How did you spend your morning?" And we said, "Oh, we got lost up in the vineyards, and we had gone to we got some, a loaf of bread, a slice of cheese, and a bottle of wine in Tao, right? And we wandered up into the hillsides and stuff like that." And he flipped over his painting and he drew a little picture of the hillside and the vineyards and stuff like that. And that was kind of one of those experiences where we just kind of wandered off and got lost. So that is, I think, such a lovely metaphor for this life. What a beautiful place to get lost, right? And that's what I strive to do sometimes. There's a koan, and it's in the Book of Serenity, case 20, where Fayan was going on a pilgrimage, and Dizang said, "Where are you going?" And Fayan said, "Around on pilgrimage." And Dizang said, "What is the purpose of pilgrimage?" And Fayan said, "I don't know." And Dizang said, "Not knowing is most intimate." And that there are some things that when I read them, it just resonates with me like the bell, right? It's like, oh gosh, this is so true. And that's one of those phrases for me. Not knowing is most intimate, and for me, asking questions isn't to find the answer, but it's just to continue that exploration of what else do I not know. So I ask a lot of questions. I never expect to find the answer, but I like being in that space of questioning. So, which some people call ambiguity, but the masters call the most intimate. And I see that as kind of like the summary of my path. I hope this made some kind of sense, my rambling, but I'm done rambling, and I appreciate the opportunity to share that with you.
Just a quick comment. So Dogen somewhere, as repeated, have said, "At last we are left with ambiguity." And we try to resolve non-duality, duality, non-duality. We're left with ambiguity. So I suppose that when people tell you to get lost, you say, "Sure."
Okay.
Happy to. Let's open up the floor for questions. We can start in the window here if you like. Then we can go to the screen. Up to you, Kosestsu.
Yep. And again, Kosestsu is always interesting to hear you speak about your past. So thank you so much for your openness always to just be willing to ask those questions and share. So I'm gonna just throw it out to the Zendo. Does anyone in the Zendo have any questions or comments right off the hand? If not, that's fine. We can start. Sensei Shinjin.
Thank you very much for your talk. One of the things that I was interested in as you discussed trajectory is, your very in-depth study of science happening kind of concurrently with your interest in this. Is there ever conflict between the two, or do you see them feeding each other?
Well, first of all, I want to, before anybody who has really done a very in-depth pursuit of science, I want to say that my degree is in physics. I taught physics for a few years, and then I went off in the industry world. So I was never a practicing scientist in terms of getting grants, doing research, things like that. But I did have that mindset, and I never saw a conflict, because to me, it was the path of science is always pursuing a deeper mystery. And as a matter of fact, I was telling Hojo that I kind of developed a set of talks for my Ongo on a theme, and my next talk will kind of explore that concept a little further. I did not see a conflict between the two, and I think most scientists would agree that, you know, it's that part of that, you know, you always learn what you don't know further down the road. It helps to have whether you're practicing Zazen, you know, we have a method, right? And in science, you have a method to help you pursue that study. So I don't see a conflict there. But did that address your question?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. I'm looking forward to your next one.
I got to finish writing it.
Again, did you have your hand up? Again, Bill Mayhew, did you have your hand up? I might have been saying stuff, but. No? Okay. And again, folks, if you're online, either on Facebook or online, just come off of mute, ask your questions. Again, we have several physicists here as well. Corolla is also a physicist as well.
That's why I made my disclaimer.
Yeah, that's right. Let me go in the chat. John, please.
I feel drawn sometimes to fill space, silence. Not sure if that's a good thing, but I just wanted to say thank you for your presentation this morning. I certainly resonated with you getting off the beaten path. In fact, my wife and I have had a number of animated disagreements about traveling with a tour group. And I've always argued that it was too insulated, too controlled, too separate from the location. And the part that particularly that I resonated with is the getting lost and possibly in trouble. For example, one time a friend and I were lost walking along a road and a thunderstorm came up and we were just caught with nowhere to go. And a local resident, this was in Ireland, pulled over in a beat up pickup truck, loaded us up, took us home, dried us out, served us hot tea. And it was such a valuable, unforgettable experience. And I'll just suggest that in America, where we have all the comforts, where we can create those insulated, secure, protected, certain lives, that there can also be a loss there. A loss in that we don't get to connect with one another when we're in trouble and in need. When I was in other countries and I was in trouble, lost, and in need, that's when I got an insight into what those people in that community were capable of. So thank you for sharing your piece about getting lost.
Thank you. I think I have to be careful not to recommend to others to be reckless, you know, with that being lost. So we lived in Europe for a decade, and we were comfortable with knowing, yes, if I get lost, if I miss the last train, you know, I know the relative safety of this region. I know, you know, I know how to order things if if I don't have the tourist menu in English, things like that. So when I say lost, I mean kind of within certain parameters. There was nothing particularly risky other than risking our timetable and things like that. But yes, but I really resonate with your point about that is often when you have the most authentic interaction with the locals, with other people, things like that, with seeing how, a lot of times when you're on the tourist path, and the tourist path can also be a metaphor for how our lives are laid out for us, right? Even at home, it's a curated experience. And when you go off that path, when you get lost, then you see a more authentic, okay, this is how everybody else in this area that I don't know, that's what the definition of being lost, right? It's I don't know this area. I don't know how people live here. I don't know how things work here. That's when you learn something new.
By the way, this is the perfect pitch for the original Frontier. Should have had Randy write the foreword. Talk about getting lost.
Yeah. So thank you, John.
That's my book.
Yeah, to you.
Putting in a plug.
Right.
Good morning. You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you, Kosetsu, for your talk. And I really wanted to make a point of hearing more about you and was glad that I did. As you were talking about two things, doubt and questioning, the value of doubt, that's something that took me a long time with Zen to be comfortable with. And I think that's where the value of a teacher and a Sangha come in, because I interpreted the feeling of not knowing as I'm doing something wrong. I should know. I should reach a point where I know and can stop this doubt. So it was great for me to hear what you had to say about that. And I also thought about in counseling, when I was a therapist, the questions there have a different function than what you're talking about. It's not to gain knowledge. It's to join the other person, help them to feel comfortable with what they're going through, basically, because they've cut themselves off usually so much from everything else. So I just kind of pondered that. The how the question is asked, I think, is really important. That you're not just asking to ask, you're asking for a deeply important reason. Thank you.
I think that's an excellent point. We're all familiar with the child asking, but why, but why, but why? And that is an extremely useful, fundamental question, but it is kind of unstructured. And as we mature, we need to learn, there are many ways to ask questions of people, of ourselves, of the universe, and I think that is a skill set to develop. I talked a little bit about in science, you ask very precise questions in very precise ways. There are other approaches in philosophy and logic in terms of how you ask questions and things like that. And I think learning different techniques, as with anything else, Sensei knows I like woodworking, I like craftsman metaphors. We have a box full of tools. You use the right tool for the right job. And I think it helps to develop different questioning techniques to know how to, when to use them and how to use them. So thank you for bringing that up.
Case in point, anybody who's interested, I sent to you the Paul Rogers interview technique.
Non-directive interview.
Non-directive interview. It teaches you a slightly different way of talking and phrasing questions, not slightly different, radically different actually. And it's just probing and getting the other person to open up and talk. And put in a plug for my upcoming book next year. It's a profile of where I see Zen as fitting into the culture. The original Frontier is kind of a user's manual. This one is more like, where does Zen fit in this culture? And it's very much along the lines that Kosetsu is talking about. So I'm going to give him the 3 questions that I associate, and then he can address that. So I'm profiling Zen as sort of being down the middle between the extremes of rationalism and science on one end, with the extreme of secular reductionism, you might say, as the most extreme form of that. And on the other end of the spectrum, theism and Christianity and all the theistic religions, and fundamentalism being the most extreme version of that. So I profile 8 different dimensions, including method. We use Zazen, they use prayer, they use bench test experiment. Zazen kind of partakes of both. So this is the way I'm profiling Zen, as being a third way, a different choice between the, turning to science in times of stress, such as we have now with the pandemic, or turning to religion, theistic religion. Profiling Zen as a third way, a place we can turn that can help. So the first dimension I have is the questions, the questions they ask. And so for theism, religion in general, philosophies included. I don't go into philosophy a lot in the text. Due out again next year. It's the next year. They ask the why questions. And I often half jokingly say, in Zen, we don't address the why questions. That's like speculation. Buddha was against rank speculation about how did it all begin, where's it all going to end, that kind of thing. And then on the other end, science asks the how questions. As Kosetsu pointed out, how do things work? How do they get to be the way it is? And how can we make it work better? And how can we manipulate it to our own benefit, etc. And in the middle, Buddhism, Zen, as Kosetsu pointed out, asks what questions? What is this that thus comes, as we know, asked the eventual successor, what is it that thus comes? And he was unable to answer, so he spent 8 years practicing with Li Nong. And he comes in one day and says, after 8 years, he comes in and says, to try to name it would be to miss the point, something like that, after only 8 years. Sitting with the question. So how do you feel about profiling it that way? Why religion and philosophy? How science, engineering, etc., and then down the middle, what?
So I think anybody who knows me knows that I'm immediately thinking, oh, that would be a fun thing to do. And again, mostly just because it would raise more questions. But for example, I really like that approach that you described a few Sundays ago with the different, the like 7 or so questions.
Yeah,
eight.
Well, 3 questions with 8 different dimensions. Questions in one of the dimensions.
Right. So I think that would be interesting. I couldn't do it extemporaneously right here, but I think that would be a very interesting exercise and very enlightening in terms of that's a challenging term to use in this context. It's overcharged with meaning, but different people respond to different things. Like, in the political discussion with COVID, some people respond to scientific explanation, some people don't. Some respond to trust in authority figures, right or wrong, and so on. Different people respond different ways. I think it's useful to know what aspects of each approach you can leverage.
If you look at the Zen, for instance, we use all 3 questions really. The how question is basically, how do you do Zazen? We train people how to sit. That's the main thing. The method is the main thing we transmit. And it's a how. How do you do this? And then what is the big question. And then why, I think, is answered by Dogen's vow, for instance. Dogen goes very poetically, talks about why did we do this at all? What's the context? Where does it come from? And so forth. So you have to, and as explained in the text, how is sometimes why. And the example we used, I had some help with this from a professor in North Georgia, and a bridge falls down. So why and how are commingled. Somebody dynamited it. That's how it happened. And then the question also is, why did they dynamite it? You know, they could have dynamited because it was dangerous, or they could be a terrorist blowing up a bridge. So all three questions sort of overlap, obviously, but I think as emphasis, re-emphasize the why. What fill in the blank is this? What's happening?
And so that's part of your talk. You know, I know we work a lot weekly, like every day with pinging or something. But part of what I picked up in your talk was your ability to be vulnerable, to be able to get to the point to where you could just even be open to letting go and getting lost. Because we work in similar environments, and it's sometimes hard to go in and not feel like you know the answers. But you know, as I've gone on in my personal career, in my life too, it's good to not go in knowing the answers. And in fact, when you do think that you know the answers, that's not the point at all. Can you speak a little bit about your process of getting to the point to where you were able to let go of some of that control, to where you were open enough to be able to put yourself in the space of being vulnerable enough to get lost, to not know that you didn't need to have the answers? Can you speak just a little bit about that?
Sure, I'll try. I think my first and fundamental answer to that is just practice. You know, start off small. I'll give like what I'm doing right here, public speaking. I've given talks at conferences and things like that, and that we all know that a lot of people are terrified by that. And I have often joked, but it's the truth that, well, you know, once you get over the fact that you will embarrass yourself at some point and you'll survive it, it's much easier. You know, and if you hopefully you do that first in a friendly crowd, supportive crowd like your Sangha, something like that. But yeah, just practicing and making a few goofs. I joked a little bit about when we started, oh, she's recording, so if you make a mistake, it's on public record forever, you know, and just kind of laugh it off. Because, you know, you practice and you make a mistake and your community is supportive and you realize, yeah, well, that's not the worst thing that can happen. And I think that's how you learn vulnerability, is to give yourself chances to fail, but in a supportive environment, and you realize that's okay. And in fact, it can be a learning experience. And if I sometimes I jump way to huge metaphors, but you know, I see this as so much as like being a parent with a child. You know, it's that balance of, we want our child to fail, to scrape their knee, to get hurt, and we want them to get hurt enough so that they learn something without getting hurt so badly that it's, you know, irreparable damage. You know, it's that same thing. It's kind of a controlled, you know, like John and I were talking about getting lost a little bit. Well, you kind of it helps to get lost in a place that you know is a reasonably safe environment. It can't go too badly wrong. You know, things like that. I mean, is that answering your question?
It really does. And the point, because I know we have some babies here, and I wanted you to answer that specifically because as we're learning to sit, and when we have to move around, and you know, when we have to adjust the way that we sit in our chairs, it's the environment, it's the Sangha that's supporting us. I mean, and because you're in Ango, this is such a great opportunity, and I wanted to lean into that too to get a promo for you. But it's always, for me, it always, you know, the third jewel, the Buddha Dharma Sangha, has always been the place to where we actually can, you know, get our feet. And so, exactly what you said, you know, that supportive environment, and it's really not, you know, it's not a failure, really, it's an opportunity to see that we can continue to be supportive to get there, right? So.
Absolutely. And I take every opportunity to do that. I was, you know, some of my team members at work, they were working on a client material and there was a mistake. And I said, okay, I'm pointing this out. I'm not just fixing it, I'm pointing it out. But I also said, did you notice that my boss called me, he slacked me while we were live with a client. He said, you used the acronym wrong. It's really this. It's like, okay, and I adjusted mid-stride. It's like, and I pointed out to them, it's like, I failed, I was corrected. You failed, I'm correcting you. That's nothing wrong with that. That's the way we learn.
All done 7 times, get up 8. And yet we have so many people who are doing so much public speaking and embarrassing themselves completely, entirely, and yet they won't stop.
Well, some of them aren't learning from it. I hope they're learning opportunities.
And again, folks, if we sound a little bit
That was a totally nonpartisan statement, by the way. I'm registered interdependent.
Again, online, if you have any questions, again, on Facebook, again, we've got comments for Kosestsu. Thank you for sharing your story.
Sure.
From
Amy.
online. But Amy, move on.
Oh, Kosestsu, I so appreciate you. So appreciate you being here. Looking forward, and thank you for sharing more of your story. I feel a deep resonance in kind of how you have described just the crooked journey. And I guess I'm trying. I was like, do I have a question? I'm not really sure I have a question other than just really appreciating your point of view. And there was a quote that kept running through my mind as you were speaking that I realized for a long time before I found Buddhism, I sort of used it as a guide in a way. Before, I left my religion of upbringing and before I had found Buddhism, it was from Rilke. And it's a quote many of you know, I'm sure. It's, live the questions now so that one day you may live into the answer. That's not the exact quote. And I realized that in my practice here that I've actually discarded that as a philosophy, because in that quote, there's an implication of an answer. And in Buddhism, this is an endless process, and I feel like that's kind of what I heard from you in your own words, was that this is ongoing, this is endless, and maybe get lost along the way, and you might just find some really beautiful jewels. So thank you for demonstrating that in your own practice.
Thank you. I'll follow up on what Kosetsu was saying earlier in terms of promoting Ango. So I'm here. I know Amy has taken me up on the offer of a meeting. So we're going to have a practice discussion meeting. I've opened that to anybody, live or virtual. The weather is getting a little bit cooler, so we can have. I've got chairs and a table and a fan out in front of the camper. We can have it outside, or whatever you want to do. So please take the opportunity to pick my brain or just have a chat. I love chatting with folks, and yeah.
Last call for questions. So again, Kosestsu, I'm gonna let you have any final words or items that you want to leave us with from your wayfinding path. Any final comments?
One of the things I love about the STO is that we structure Ango, as an example of my path where I am right now, but this applies to so many other aspects of picking your path or making your path in the Silent Thunder Order or the ASZC is, part of the answer. My question was kind of, okay, what do I do? And the answer is like, well, what do you want it to be? I mean, there's some guidelines, but within those guidelines, you need to structure it yourself. You need to take responsibility for your path and figure it out. And I love that. And so I'm going to continue to do some of this questioning and wandering and getting a little bit lost and then finding my direction during the Ango period. So
The other aspect of the Ango, the way we do it, it's considered a concession on the formal path to not require a candidate for priesthood to do a 90-day ango or more than one. But we're a lay practice, Sangha, lay practice community and program. So, and the Soto Zen Buddhist Association had discussions like this, and they decided it would be okay for people to do 30 days at a time. So Ungan Bill Mayhew has come and done that. Roger Cochran, Segetz has done that. We've had a couple of 90 days where people were retired and they could afford to take a 90-day segment. But the thing we discovered, and this is part of the creative design path and the kind of path that Kosestsu is describing, with Sangak Dan Jocelyn coming down 1 month at a time, we'd begun to realize that it's actually a better approach than 90 days at a time. And the reason is, after the first 30 days, you can kind of reconnoiter and figure out what you did well, what you didn't do so well, what you could improve, and it gives you however many months in between before the person comes for the next 30-day segment. And then we implement our redesign of the 30 days from our experience from the first time. So it's like beta testing, and then so by the time we do the third month, it's massively improved over the first month. And then there's a cumulative effect between ongos, which only I experience, because I'm the only one who's, I do the ongo with everybody's doing an ongo. But I try to transmit that to each person just in discussion. So Kosestsu and I will begin our planning discussions this Monday after morning zazen, 6 to 7 a.m. And we're going to do training at that point and planning, and then we evolve that as we go through this 30 days. So again, something that's considered a negative or a concession within the formal framework, from our perspective, is much, much superior. And Ungan could speak to that. He's been here for the 30-day segments. Anyway, he's not going to say.
I'm good, yeah, he's got his hand up. Last comment.
Oh, he's got his hand up,
Yeah.
okay.
You sort of put me on the spot there, Hojo.
Didn't mean to.
I would say that the 3 ongos I did has probably been the highlight of my life, actually.
Wow, I feel sorry for you.
Well, the particularly best part was having lunch with Amy. So,
Oh, I see.
Kosestsu, please don't miss out on that. Make her take you down to that hamburger joint and get one of those great big juicy hamburgers.
Yep, yeah. That's the first thing they did with me.
Busting me out as a non-vegetarian. Come on.
When I was in Austin for 90 days, we got our first break where we could get out of the house, and all the women who were residents there took me down to this greasy hamburger place.
I guess it's the thing to do. I'm on go.
Oh yeah,
Go to a burger. I can take. I've got a good gluten-free one for you.
break all the rules.
And again, as always, we always want to, again, Kosestsu, thank you so much for being here. We are definitely going to be taking you up on meeting and getting some things done and strategizing. My eyebrows are going up and down. We're so excited about having Kosestsu and Ango. Also, I want to put a plug in. We have a retreat. Our retreat and conference is coming up September 28th through October 3rd. It is a hybrid. You know, a lot of it's virtual. We ask that, you know, all the information is on ASZC.org or storder.org. The schedule is up. The speaker information is up. So please check that out. And if you can, please, you don't have to come. You're not, you know, drilled into going to everything, but please, as you can attend, we understand. We would love for you to be able to attend it and practice as you can. Upcoming, we have a Raku Fusatsu tomorrow evening, as well as book club. We have everyday practice opportunities in the mornings and in the evenings virtually, or if you want to come into the Zendo, again, we ask that those that come in are, you know, vaccinated and follow masking mandates, etc. And we always, again, Sensei's will have more information about his upcoming book pretty soon. And again, we're going to be around a lot because Kosetsu is here, and we'll be having opportunities to just, we're looking at for 2022 with the Atlanta Soto Zen Center. We're looking at our schedule and programming, and we're doing some strategy work around that too. So, as always, we could not do these things without the people that are so graciously supporting our organization financially and with their with their gifts. If you have not already done so, please consider becoming a member.
I'm feeling very guilty here because I didn't mention Shikaku Paul Baker's luncheon. He was a wonderful luncheon partner also, and I appreciated it very much, but I don't want to hurt Paul's feelings.
Yeah, no feelings hurt.
So I just want to say that anybody that Ungun has called out does not need to feel obligated to do the same with me. Although I would love to meet you, but don't feel like you're put on the spot.
Thanks, Ungun, for that, and thanks to the community for supporting our priests while we're here. And again, please check us out on those websites. Again, if you have not become a consistent giver, we ask that you can continue to, if you please do so, because that, again, keeps us up and running and supporting our Sangha and our teachers. And again, today, actually, if we have some new people that would like, we have on second Sundays is our community practice Sunday. Kosetsu is here, but we actually offer a meet and greet, and we actually have a presentation if you want to hear about, the Sangha. So if you're willing to stay, you can. If not, that's fine. We can do it some other time. But we always offer that. And while Kosetsu is here, he gets to tag team with me on that. He didn't know that, but I'm just throwing him.
It's a cool PowerPoint.
Yeah, exactly. So, Sensei Hojo, anything else?
I feel like we're forgetting something, but that's probably too much to even think about anyway.
Oh, and we do have Jukai that's going to be coming up on November 14th.
Yeah, that was it.
That was it.
November 14th, if you want to undergo Jukai this year, we're trying to figure out ways to do it remote because there's a guy in Arkansas who would have to drive up to Wichita. You may just let him just put his own vestments on or something. So if you want to join this year, the class of this year, we're closing out November 7th. So we can prepare the certificates and things before the 14th. And we'll do a ceremony here, but we'll probably do it outdoors, weather permitting. November is also Founders Month. That's why it's a good time, we think, to do Jukai.
And without further ado, we will allow Sensei to lead us in our closing Dharma verses. And again, as always, thank you for your presence and your practice. We are so grateful. Thank you.
Should be on one of the inside covers. Beings are numberless, I love to freedom, delusions are inexhaustible, I love to freedom, Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them, the Buddha way is unsurpassable, I love to freedom, beings are numberless, I vow to free them, delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them, Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them, the Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it. Beings are numberless, I vow to free them, delusions are inexhaustible, I vow to end them, Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them, the Buddha way is unsurpassable, I vow to realize it.
Awesome. For those folks that are online that would like to stay, we're just going to leave the our camera and things up, and it'll be just a second for us to transition to allow folks that want to stay, and those to go. So just give us a few minutes. But gotcha, everyone. Thank you so much for your practice and your presence.